Judges chapter 3. Now, this is not your typically expected Easter passage. We read the Easter story right at the beginning of the service, but this is a story that is not typically, at least immediately, associated with Easter. But during the course of this past year, we had a midweek Bible study, and we read through the entire book of Judges. The entire book. And it's a challenging book because there's so many fascinating and sometimes very intricately written stories, but it's not all easy to swallow. It's not all nice stuff. There's some gritty, there's some even gruesome portions, but we read through it all, and it takes there are 12 judges, and then there's 5 chapters at the end. But here's what I think in our study we found to be kind of the overarching theme of Judges, which when you hear it, you realize, well, that's also the overarching theme of the Bible. That's the overarching theme of redemptive history. It's the overarching theme of Easter, and it goes like this, simply, that the Lord delivers unfaithful people. That the Lord's deliverance is for sinners. Right? That's kind of it in a nutshell, right? But that's the story that keeps happening in the book of Judges. That's the story that keeps happening in our lives. And in Judges, the stories go that Israel is described as being unfaithful. And the phrase is this, that Israel did evil in the eyes of the Lord, or Israel did what was right in their own eyes. Right? And then it doesn't describe so much, except in the last 5 chapters of Judges, there's a bunch of stories that are just awful. And in those 5 chapters, what is being described is this is what life is like when everybody does what's right in their own eyes. They're terrible stories. They really never get preached on because they're so they are descriptive of what life is like when everyone does what's right in their own eyes. But what happens in the 12 Judges, when details are given, the details aren't about what the people did that was evil, but what the Lord did to deliver them. Repeatedly, the story is about the deliverance of the Lord for unfaithful people. And so that's what happens over and over again. And so we're going to read this story this morning from Judges chapter 3, and it's not sanitized for Sunday. But then none of the stories in Judges really are sanitized for Sunday, although in our reading of the story, the English does somewhat clean up some of the more maybe honestly graphic aspects of the Hebrew text. But Judges chapter 3 is where we are this morning. Judges chapter 3, beginning at verse 12, and we're going to read through verse 30. And as we do so, we ask for the Lord's Spirit to lead us into a proper understanding of His truth for us this morning. Lord, send your Spirit so that beyond story, truth is revealed. That even beyond details, we find grace, we find love, we find what you are doing in this world and have done in Jesus Christ. So lead us, O Lord, into hearing your word in Judges 3 this morning. In His name we pray. Amen. So this is the word of the Lord. Once again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. Getting the Ammonites and Amalekites to join him, Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. Again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and He gave them a deliverer, Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Gera the Benjamite. The Israelites sent him with tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now Ehud had made a double-edged sword about 1.5 feet long, which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. He presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very fat man. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way the men who had carried it. At the idols near Gilgal, he himself turned back and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. The king said, quiet, and all his attendants left him. Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his summer palace and said, I have a message from God for you. As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand and drew the sword from his right thigh and plunged it into the king's belly. Even the handle sank in after the blade which came out his back. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Then Ehud went out to the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. After he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked. They said, he must be relieving himself in the inner room of the house. They waited, to the point of embarrassment. But when he did not open the doors of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. There they saw their Lord fallen to the floor, dead. While they waited, Ehud got away. He passed by the idols and escaped to Sarah. And when he arrived there, he blew a trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went down with him from the hills, with him leading them. Follow me, he ordered, for the Lord has given Moab, your enemy, into your hands. So they followed him down, and taking possession of the fords at the Jordan that led to Moab, they allowed no one to cross over it. At that time they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong. Not a man escaped. That day Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. This is the word of the Lord. Well, there's an Easter story for you. And we're going to get to that story, but while we're telling stories, let me jump ahead to chapter 4, which we didn't read, which has another story. And in that story, Israel does evil in the sight of the Lord. See, there's a cycle that goes on here. And the Lord gave them over to the Canaanites, and under Deborah's leadership, who the Lord raised up, they defeated the Canaanites, and the commander of the Canaanite army, whose name was Sisera, he escaped, got away for the moment. He escaped to the tent of a woman by the name of Jael. And what Jael did then in the tent was that she then killed Sisera intentionally. She took a tent peg and she drove it through his head while he slept. She nailed the guy. And it is particularly, you see, in the telling of that story, that it's what she did with the nail, with the tent peg, that is the crux of the story, because it is really in the driving of that tent peg into Sisera's head that Israel is delivered from the Canaanites. That is how and where the story tells us Israel has been delivered. And that word that describes what Jael did with the tent peg is why I'm telling you that story, because the word means not just nailing, not just hammering. It has a sense of that which is something that is forcefully presented, is one way you could say it. The nail was forcefully presented to Sisera. And it's in that forceful presentation that's where we're going to be focusing on this morning in Judges chapter 3. Because this word forceful presentation is also, for example, described or used in the Hebrew language as, for example, what is done when an agreement is reached by two people. In the presenting of their hands, shaking on a business deal. You see, they didn't shake hands, like we say shake. No, what the Hebrews say is that the hands are forcefully presented to each other. Right? And it is in the forceful presentation that the deal is sealed. I mean, the deal still has to be carried out and stuff still has to happen. But it's in the hands being presented that it's done. It's as good as done because they've sealed the deal. Well, in Sisera's death, Israel was delivered and the deal was sealed. So now with that, we turn to Judges chapter 3. And in Judges chapter 3, this same word that is used to describe what Sisera received when jail nailed him happens twice in our story. Now, you didn't hear the word because it's a Hebrew word, but it gets translated differently in the story. So we're going to look at our story in Judges chapter 3 and find it happening twice. And that's where the story has its center point and where we find ourselves hearing God's word this morning, I believe. So the story begins, there's two parts. Because the word happens twice. The first time the story happens is in the part of the story where you have two main characters. The two main characters are Ehud, who is the deliverer that the Lord has raised up. And the second character is Eglon, who is the king of the Moabites, the Canaanites, who has now the rule over the Israelites and who demands tribute from them. And we are given one particular detail about each character, right? One character, Ehud, or one characteristic about each character. Ehud is described as a left-handed man, as all the Benjaminites are left-handed men. So Ehud, as one of the Benjamites, he is a left-handed man. So that's important. Because Ehud, as you know, makes a sword, a two-edged sword. It's about 1.5 feet long. And we are given this additional detail that he straps the sword to his right thigh. This is concealed carry. He takes then, you see, this is important because a left-handed man would draw his sword from the left thigh to wield it. Now, this is not what you'd expect because a sword, a regular fighting guy, the sword would be strapped to the left thigh and he would draw it with his right hand. But we are told very specifically he is left-handed, he straps the sword to his right thigh. And we're told one detail about Eglon. He is very fat. That's all we know. The story goes that they bring the tribute. Right? Eglon and the Canaanites are demanding tribute from the Israelites. And so they bring the tribute to Eglon. And then the men who had carried it are sent on. And Ehud turns back and he heads back to the palace. And he says, I have a secret message for you, O king. And the tension of the drama story escalates as he comes to the palace and he says, I have a message from the Lord for you. And Eglon, who wants to receive this message, which he assumes is some measure of honor, he asks for quiet and he dismisses all his attendants. And so then as he rises, as he stands to receive the message of the Lord, Ehud says, I have a message from the Lord for you. And he takes his left hand and puts it inside his clothing to draw the sword. But this is a non-threatening gesture because battles are fought with the right hand. So Eglon is of no fear here because he does not see what is about to happen. Ehud, who is left-handed, makes this non-threatening gesture, reaching in, pulling the sword from his right thigh, and he plunges it into the belly of Eglon, and the sword goes in all the way. It is swallowed by this man. He takes it hook, line, and sinker, you might say. He goes all the way in, and he falls down, and this is his death. In the meantime, then, Ehud escapes. He leaves, closing the doors behind him and locking them, and he gets away. When the Moabites then come to return to their king, there's the curious story of their delay. They do not go in right away. And here's where it gets a little earthy. Because they do not go in, the door is locked. They assume that Eglon has locked the door because Eglon, the text says, in the English says he's relieving himself. They think he's going to the bathroom. And they think this for a good reason. it's also kind of glossed over in the text, because what the text literally says, well, I can't tell you exactly what the text literally says, but I'll tell you what basically has happened. The sword has pierced his bowels, his intestines. And so even though they are outside the door, there is an aroma that convinces them that Eglon is going to the bathroom. They can smell it. And so they wait. And they wait. And they wait. To the point of embarrassment, the text says. To the point of embarrassment. Eventually, they're so awkward and embarrassed about all this that even though they can tell what he's doing in there, they feel a need to go in and see what's going on. And so they let themselves in, and they find that that's not what that's happening. They find out what has happened, and that is that their king has received the message of the Lord, and he is dead. You see, that is all part of the story. But during this time, of course, Ehud gets away. He gets away safely. But this is where the word happens in the story. It's in the plunging of the sword. The word here is that Ehud, not with the right hand, with the left hand, powerfully, pointedly, you might say, presents forcefully the message of the Lord. And he presents it not just to Eglon. The larger story here is that the message of the Lord is being delivered to the powers of the world that are oppressing and demanding tribute from the people of God, even though the people of God are doing what's right in their own eyes. That the Lord is working for the deliverance of his people, even though they're unfaithful. But that in the deliverance of this sword, the powers that would enslave the precious people of God are being slain. It's not just a king. The greater truth is that that which would enslave the people is being defeated. Now, you know, as much as there's a sense in which this word is described as you know, that which is pounded, that which is nailed, and you might, I don't think it's a word that implies correlation. I think it's just coincidence, that like what Jael did with Sisera in the pounding of the nail, we might just by way of coincidence hear Good Friday. That it was in that pounding, that presentation, that deliverance is coming. As Jesus was nailed, there is going to be deliverance coming. As Sisera was nailed, there was deliverance coming. And as Eglon receives this powerful presentation, deliverance is coming. And so this is the first occasion of the story. It's the first occasion of this deliverance. And I'm going to get to a few particular explanations of that, but what we see in that first part then is really the Easter story, because it is in Easter, right, that in Jesus Christ's resurrection, we can phrase this similarly, in Jesus Christ's resurrection, it is powerfully and pointedly and eternally presented to the world that would enslave the people of Jesus Christ, that would demand tribute from the people of Jesus Christ. It is being presented to the world that those powers are being defeated. That's the message that's what Jesus Christ did on Easter morning. So there's this correlation, that this is the theme that God is working through the Bible, even in these wonderful Old Testament stories, that God is at work in making a declaration, a powerful presentation to the world, that those powers that would seek to oppress us are being defeated. But there is a second use of this word in the story. A second occasion. Because when Ehud gets away and goes to the hill country of Ephraim, the text tells us that he blows his trumpet and calls the people to follow him. Right? And the word here in verse 27 is follow me because the Lord has delivered you. And the key word here is what Ehud does now, not with the sword, but with the trumpet. Now in English it says he blew the trumpet. And that's what we understand. I mean, that's how you can, that's a good English translation. But here, he literally, and here I mean literally, he literally forcefully presented the trumpet. It's the same Hebrew word. And it's not the trumpet that he forcefully presents, but it's the announcement that the trumpet presents. He now is forcefully presenting the message of the Lord to the people of Israel. So there's two forceful presentations. One time the forceful presentation is to the powers of the world, and the second forceful presentation is to the people of God. And both times it is the message of the Lord. And he says then to the people of the Lord, he says, follow me, for the Lord has delivered you. And he says it as if it has already happened. Because it has already happened. He uses the past tense. Not that the Lord is about to deliver you, or the Lord is in the process of delivering you, or that maybe sometime in the future the Lord will get around to delivering you. He says, no, the Lord has already delivered you. You don't even know this, but Eglon is dead. The power that would enslave you, the power that would oppress you, the power that demands, extorts tribute from you is dead. The victory has already been won. Yes, there are some battles yet to follow, so come on, let's do battle. But the victory has already been won. So you can see that this has already embedded in these Old Testament stories the great anticipation of the Easter story. The battle has already been won. The defeat of the enemy has already happened. Now the presentation to the people of the Lord is follow me, because the victory of the Lord is yours. And you are the people of the Lord. And even though you've been unfaithful, even though you've done evil in the sight of the Lord, even though you've done what's right in your own eyes, you are the ones who are dearly loved by God. So follow me. We are those who have been given life because Jesus Christ has achieved it for us. See, this is the Easter story already being told way back in the Old Testament, and it happens over and over again. It's been forcefully presented to the world. It's also forcefully presented to us. And so you see on Easter, this is what happens. Jesus deals the death blow. He deals the death blow. We are delivered. It's a done deal. It's happened. It's a forceful presentation. It's already been done. It's already been done. Now there's still some work to do, but the battle has already been done, and we're now to follow the Lamb into battle against the forces of the world, which still think they have a right to exact tribute from us, who still would operate as if the decisive battle has not been won, as if the king is not dead. And we are called to live as those who know that everything that appears to be fine is not so fine, and that the world as it appears is not the world that God has in mind. That there is some difference between the world as it is now and the world that is to come. And we know those differences, and we are living in the way that Jesus Christ would have us live in the light of what has happened on Easter. So, I have two applications. The first is, thank God for left-handed people. I just had to say that because my mother was left-handed. But that's not really the application. The application is, I think you might say, more pointed. And allow me to be honest enough to be so pointed with us, because we live in a world in which the victory of Easter has already changed the world. Right? We know this, that the Lord has delivered Christ up from the grave, and he has defeated death, and he has defeated the tyranny of the devil and the power of sin over our lives, and the powers of this world that would seek tribute from us and seek allegiance from us. That Christ's rule has definitively and powerfully and pointedly been presented to this world and defeated, and now we are called to follow in the light of the cross. John chapter 21 verse 19, Jesus says to his followers, "Follow me," after the resurrection. But here's where we live. We live in a world that has all sorts of pressures and influences that are seeking to affect us as if Jesus Christ was not on the throne. We live in a place that seeks to have us, even though all our tribute is to go to Christ, that would have us bring our tribute elsewhere. We live in a world of powers that seeks to have us take our lead, not from Christ, but from other influences and effects in the world. To have our lives shaped and formed by those powers. To have our values guided by those powers. To have our minds given over to their influences, to have our priorities informed by their expectations and demands, and to have our allegiances fashioned in order to serve them. But they've been defeated. They've been defeated. We live this side of Easter. And what is presented to us, forcefully presented to us, is to now follow Jesus Christ and to follow him alone. Because we live in a world where it is assumed or believed that we would still do whatever is right in our own eyes. Whatever is right for you, whatever is right for you. Do whatever you feel is right. Do whatever you think is right. That's sort of one of the prevailing moral ethics of our time, isn't it? Whatever you feel is right. And we're told that our emotions are how we should make those decisions, and that our emotions identify us, our emotions determine us and control us. And we're basically powerless against it, but that's where we live, and so we have to follow that. We live where ego and self-esteem are that which will either make us or break us. We live where selfies and Facebook likes and tweets is where we find a sense of personal value. You see, we live in a swirl of cultural influences and forces, and they're not all bad, but they have aspects to them that would invite our following them versus more clearly following Jesus Christ. Let me get a little more specific. We live in a place where these are forces that do not fully align with the kingdom that we are called to be a part of. We live in a world where we have a culture of ubiquitous advertising. I mean, advertising everywhere. Which tells us, subliminally, subtly, I mean, this is how the world works. It tells us that our identity, that who we are, is we are basically consumers. That's who you are. You are basically a consumer. And advertising everywhere is everywhere telling you that. We live in a culture of body image, which tells us that our value is in how we think others see us. That's where we live. We live in an entertainment-saturated culture which tells us we are really not much more than passive agents in this world, and that we are kind of primarily portable eyeballs for product placement. That's who you are. We live in a sports industry culture that invites our greatest and first allegiances and sacrifices such that we would live and die by the scoreboard. And this all sports compel our schedules. They compel our conversation. They compel us to meet their undying demands. That's where we live. You see, not that these things are all bad, but they do work collectively sometimes against our living more directly, more clearly, more purely in light of the kingdom that is before us. We live in a culture that sometimes pushes our sense of security and trust and life or death into our hands. We live in a smartphone culture that asks for the tribute of distraction from embodied personal relationships and eye-to-eye contact, and distraction from more important tasks that are before us. This is where we live. We live in a fashion culture which requests that we study and indulge and expend ourselves in passing trends. We live in a culture of marketed temptations that can be seen as just fun and innocent and delightful, and that even we can engage in them without any conscience and simply with a smile and a knowing nod and wink. We live in a culture of retaliation, that if someone hits you, hit them back harder. You see, the list goes on and on and on. I'm saying that we live in a world that is constantly challenging us to discern which kingdom do we consider ourselves belonging to, and where is our tribute primarily directed? That's the challenge of discipleship. What is presented to us is the one who has been risen up by the Lord to deliver us, who now forcefully presents to us the word, and he says, "Follow me. Follow me. Because this is who you are. This is who you are. You are those who are dearly loved by the Lord Jesus Christ. That even though we are unfaithful, even though we do what's evil in our own eyes, even though we do what's evil in the eyes of the Lord, or do what's right in our own eyes and evil in the eyes of the Lord, even though we are who we are, the Lord has worked for our deliverance." This is amazing, people. That we are not left on our own, and we are not our own. And not only are we not our own, neither are we owned by the powers of this world, which would seek to enslave us and would demand tribute from us. They have been defeated. We belong to Jesus Christ. You are friends of Jesus Christ. You've been purchased by Jesus Christ. He loves you now. He loves you powerfully. He loves you eternally. And he calls you to follow me, he says, into a world that is a little bit different than the world that is pressing upon you. Follow me as one who knows that things are being made new. Follow me and live in the light that you know that you are made in the image of God. That you are a child of God, a son and a daughter of the King. That you are those who live with the knowledge that things are eternal. That you live and you know that you are called now, like Jesus Christ, to live in a way that you are willingly sacrificing yourself for the gospel. That you live with lives of sacrifice and service, that what marks you is loving kindness and tender mercy, that the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and gentleness, and self-control, these are the things that mark you because you are belonging to Jesus Christ. That you know that your only hope in life and in death, your only comfort, your only reason for living now is because you know you belong to Jesus Christ, for he has set you free from the tyranny of the devil. We now then consider others better than ourselves. That we trust in the Lord. And that we are called to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And that we, and this is countercultural, we love our neighbor as we love ourselves. You see, the world would live as if Christ is not on the throne. But you know, he's not on the cross. You know, he's not in the grave. You know, he is on the throne. And that you belong to him. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Lord may